Hey there everyone, it's Ed here from Bunch of Swines again. Today we're going to look at how we like to trim a brisket. Basically we're going to look at 3 different trims that we tend to use when we're cooking briskets, depending on what we're looking for as a final result. So I mean, it is going to be a bit different to the Central Texas style brisket trims that you may have seen before. What we're going to do is look at how we would prepare this if we were cooking it whole, how we quite often do when we're cooking for catering. We're then going to look at how we would separate out the burnt ends a bit, so we can cook it still as one piece, but also cook it, get some bark and flavour onto the point end. And we'll also look at how we separate it and how we're going to make the most out of cooking this big piece of meat. So what we've got here is probably somewhere in the region of like 8 to 9 kilos. So I don't know, something like 16-18 pound. But what we're going to do is we're going to trim it down, get it looking all nice, and show you how we don't waste any of this. So how we're going to use pretty much every part of meat on the brisket, whether it be for cooking for ourselves, so cooking whole, or look at how we can use some of that trim elsewhere. So first things first, we're going to need to get this out of the cryovac. Normally when I'm preparing stuff at home, I tend to just try and use a clean hand for the knife and a dirty hand for holding the meat. Brisket this size, I mean it's a messy job. It's definitely a two-handed job. So I'm going to put some gloves on, just so it keeps things a bit clean, a bit tidier. And the first thing I need to do once I get these on, okay, is opening the cryovac. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I can see here that it's got a it's in this plastic bag. So I'm going to cut it through the top. I'm also going to flip it over so it's fat cap side up. The reason why I do this is because I'm going to run my knife along the back of the packaging, and I don't want to gouge the meat by accident. So doing it this way, I can keep all the juices, the blood that's in the bag that's leaked out there, and not gouge my brisket. So this is always the fun part. Okay, there we go. So what we're going to do is take quite a big close-up of this. So let's get into it. Okay, so on our brisket here, you can see I've got it out of the cryovac now. I've got it laid down on a disposable cutting board. When we're talking about a brisket, first thing I'm looking at is the 2 different sides. So this side here, I call the meat side, and then flipping it over here, this is what I call the fat cap side. Okay, so generally I leave the fat cap intact. I don't really touch it that much. The reason for that is that most of the cookers, or all of the cookers, well, pretty much most of the cookers that I have, all of the heat actually comes from the underneath. So the idea being that I use that fat cap as a shield to protect the meat, to make sure that I don't burn or dry anything out. Just acts as a little barrier, and then I can cut it all off after it's cooked anyway, so I'm not worried about that. Normally, what I'd do is to, if I was cooking this for catering, or just cooking it nice and simple for backyard at home, I would take off, use my knife, raising it up as much as I can and just shaving close to the meat to take this excess fat off of the meat side of the brisket, basically to help my rub stick to it and allow smoke to penetrate it better. I know that there's a lot of people that would just cook it like this, and maybe it's just a bit of my OCD, but I go pretty aggressive with this stuff to get it all off. So there'll be some parts where you might see a fat vein, which, you know, I think I've got a bit of a fat vein going on there, which I won't gouge in too much because that could possibly split the brisket during the cooking. But, you know, normally I'll just go through this to begin with. And one of the other bits that I'll pretty much always remove is this area here of greyed meat. So, I mean, someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is it's, you know, when they process it in the, you know, in the plant, they quite often spray hot water on the outside of some of the cuts to sort of seal it and to kill off any bacteria before it goes in the cryovac. So it's kind of like partially cooked. It's safe, it's fine. A lot of people cook it, but I don't really like that. I mean, so I always just cut that off. You know, it's also an opportunity for me to then see, you know, what kind of marbling that I've got running through the flat. So, you know, that's a piece that I would just take off like that. I mean, I can also see I've got quite a bit of a overhang on the fat cap on here. So again, I'll just cut at an angle to just take that down a bit, just to thin out some of that fat. So just like that. So, and then I can start getting to work on this silver skin more. So yeah, as you can see here, we've got quite a nice marbled brisket. Yeah, which basically means I know that it's going to cook up nicely. I'm not going to be worried about having a, you know, a dry product at the end of the, you know, at the end of the cooking, whether we cook it hot and fast or low and slow. You know, having a decent marbling running through the flat is always one of the key things that I'm looking for. So, you know, in a sense, I mean, let's just get some of this off. So sadly on this one, I have got a bit of a slash in the flat, but it seems to be running with the grain rather than across the grain. So I'm not too worried about that. I won't have to do any surgery to try and solve that out. But, you know, we're just taking our time. You know, I'd rather, when I'm working on a brisket, I would rather take smaller cuts at a time, because I can always take a second cut. I can't stick it back. So we're just gonna finish up this corner. Okay, see. Yeah, you see what I mean when I say I am a bit OCD about this. I know a lot of people are quite happy with some of this silver skin. I'm not. I just don't like it. So I'll spend a bit of extra time just getting that off. Okay, and work on this side up here. So it's all good. Okay. See, I'm just putting my hand underneath to raise the meat up so I can just slide my knife off. You know, slide my knife across it, and just to remove it in large sheets. When we first started doing this, we would spend hours sort of sitting there picking at it piece by piece. But, you know, as with everything, the more that you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. You know, you learn better technique. So, so yeah, that's how we've evolved it. Yeah, also I generally try to cook a larger brisket. It's my preference at home, just because it leaves me more meat to play with. I know that currently we're on lockdown at the moment, so, you know, we're only cooking for the two of us. So something like this might be a bit much. So that's why we're going to look at how, you know, some of the secondary trims that we would do from this. So looking here, okay, that's all fine. I don't have too much of a fat wedge here. This seam here seems okay. It's kind of soft, so I would generally leave that. And that would be, you know, if I was just cooking a basic brisket without doing anything, you know, without wanting to get too technical into it, that would be ready for me to rub and get ready to put onto the smoker. Okay. But one of the things I really like about brisket is burnt ends. Okay, and burnt ends comes from the point end, which is this section here. You know, normally you can identify it because there's this fat wedge that separates them. You know, even on a less marbled brisket, there will be some form of fat wedge there, so you can help identify the two. So, you know, how do we go about splitting these out? So what I would normally do is I just put a little V cut into that fat wedge, okay, just so I can then start to see exactly how deep it goes and where that join starts to become. And I'll go a bit further down here as well. Okay, let me just start pulling that out. So there we go, I can start to see more of the separation there, so I've got a bit of a better idea of where the meat is. Really, when I'm separating these out, I am generally looking to preserve the fat on the back of the flat, because that bit's leaner, it's potentially going to dry out. So when I'm separating, I will always cut a bit heavier into the point, so I'm not too worried if I gouge a little bit of the meat out of it, or there's, you know, I don't want any fat covering that side of it anyway. So, you know, we're just going to keep going down here. Now, if we go to here on this end, so I can actually see where there is a natural split there. So this will mean I can help get my knife in there and actually start to, you know, to really start working on splitting it. Again, this is just like little nicks with the tip of your knife, just to start pulling it apart. Okay, takes a little bit of time to get going, just because you want to make sure that you're on the right track. Okay, and then going. What I often like to do when I get to this point as well is just to flip it over. So if I push it over to this side, I can then start to push the point back. I don't want to be this rough with the flat. Okay, I don't want to be this rough with the flat, but with the point, I'm okay with it. And then I can start trimming it down like this and getting close to the meat. So you can see I might be taking a bit of the point meat at the moment. So I might need to adjust the depth of my cuts. Just flip it back just to get the right, just to make sure I'm on track again. So. As you can tell, the joys of cooking at home. Got the dog in the background barking away. So there we go. I've got that separated out a bit more. There we go. Now I've got it like this, I can see it much better. Okay, and then I can just start working it, just a little split at a time, pushing against the point. Okay, and separating it out. So. So we're just gonna keep going. You know, yeah, I can see, yes, I am. That is point meat there, so I am gouging that a little bit, but I'm not worried about it. This end down here is always really thin, so a lot of that will get trimmed anyway. Yeah, I'm just being really careful on this edge, closer to where that point in the flat joins there. Okay, and we'll start working it down, and again, it's just, you know, just using the point of your knife, little cuts. Okay, and then until we start getting bigger, you know, I start being more certain of where things are. So I'm going to take this bit off the top because that doesn't look great and it won't sit very well. That's a little piece of that, and then just trim this bit of fat off. Okay, but then, so if I was wanting to cook burnt ends, and you know, say if I'm wanting to cook burnt ends and I've only got limited cooking space. Say if I'm cooking on a Weber Smokey Mountain or a ProQ bullet smoker, you know, this would be probably my preferred method, because, you know, I can still fit this all on the one cooking rack, you know, and then all I just need to do is just clean up the this hard fat on top of the point. Okay, and you see there is quite a lot of fat in this, but yeah, you do need that fat in a brisket. So it's yeah, you can see I'm just trying to trim up the point just to show you, you know, how I would do it if I was cooking it all as one piece. So there we go, sort of getting into that. Okay, and then just trim that bit down here. Okay, so there we go. So here you can see here, you know, I've got my point cleaned up, I've got my flat there. You know, I managed to expose the meat side of the point, so I can get some nice bark build up on my burnt ends. Like I said, I mean, this is how I would trim it if I was cooking on a, say, a Weber Smoky Mountain or a ProQ, or, you know, some other kind of bullet smoker, where I can still keep the whole, you know, the piece of meat whole, but I'm not going to, you know, but I would still want to get burnt ends from it. So that's one, you know, another way that we would do it. The final part of what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to separate it completely and see how I would then trim it afterwards. So all I'm going to do is just carry on with what I was doing before. Okay, just keep on going, tip of the blade, little cuts at a time. Okay, and you know, you just keep working it, and you see it starts to cut. You know, you reach a point where it just starts pulling away a lot easier. So, you know, that's generally what we're doing. So, yeah, and then once I get to, you know, about there, you know, there's not really any more meat to be had, so I'm just going to cut it straight across like that. Okay, and then I've fully separated my point from my flat. Okay, so that should be, you know, nice and easy enough for you to see. One of the problems when you do it like this, though, is that you then end up with this uneven height on the point. So what I'm going to do now is just actually take off some of this hard fat to try and level it out, because if I have big dips in my flat like that, as it cooks, it's basically going to pool. So, you know, I'm going to get pools of liquid and puddles, and that's basically just going to stop my bark from forming nicely. So I'm just cutting off these bits of fat. Okay, parts of the fat cap. Yeah, that meat there that I've exposed, that's a bit of point meat anyway, so I'm not worried about that. But I'm not going to throw away these bits of fat. Okay, what I'm actually going to do is layer them up in there. Okay, so you can see I'm sort of you know, picking through the fat that I've trimmed out, trying to build up the height underneath the flat, so when it does sit, normally it sits at a better height. You know, what I'm noticing there, so that's a little gouge in the fat cap that's happened in the packing plant. So, you know, I just put a little band-aid over that just to, you know, stop it from drying out. I'm probably a bit high on the fat at this end, so again, I'll just take it down there. Okay, and then I'll use that as well just to layer it up, because if I layer it up in the middle as well, you know, this is then going to help raise the height there, which means any water, any liquid that comes out as it cooks will just naturally roll off the sides of the brisket. So you can see there, that's much better. We've got a much better shape. It tends to be curving outwards, so great. I'm really happy with that. So the next part comes though, is that this is still a very large piece of meat. Okay, so is it best for me to cook it all this way, or actually can I trim it down even further, get some, mean that I leave myself with the prime, the best section of the flat, and then I still have some brisket trimmings, which quite often we will save, we'll cube them up and put them in the freezer, and then they're just ready to be ground whenever we want. Whenever we want some burgers, or if we want to make meatloaf or something like that we need ground beef for. So what I'm going to do here is just take my knife. I'm just going to cut this edge off. Okay, I'm not shoeboxing it. In competition barbecue, a lot of people will cut their briskets to the size of the box. I'm not doing that. I'm just taking these edges off because the edges will dry out anyway. This area here is a bit thin, a bit flaky. So, again, I'm going to just take my knife down there. Okay, and take that off, so that looks a bit nicer. I tend not to like these big pointy ends on the end, because they tend to burn a bit. So, what I'm actually going to do is shorten this down, okay, and round it off. Just like that. And I'm going to do a similar thing back here as well, because this stuff's all going to overcook at a different rate before this is cooked. So if I take my knife here, and then I can just carve it off. Okay, and you see there now I've got a lovely beautiful brisket flat, okay, ready to cook. So that will work fine for all of my anything else I want to do. Here I've got some prime bits of brisket. It's going to have a nice high fat content when I grind it, so when I'm making burgers, I have a good fat ratio, so they'll be juicy. With the point end as well, a lot of this, if you look down here, there's not really that much fat, that much meat here, there's just a lot of fat. So what I'll do is just square it off down at the bottom. Okay, and again, that's going to go into my grinding pile. I'm just going to square this off. I just like it to look neat, that's all. And again, that goes in the grinding pile, and same. So this area here always ends up being really fatty and hard to render. So again, I'm just going to cut this down. Just going to cut that down like that. Okay. And then, we've got our, take that bit of fat off, and then we've got our point there. So you can see from here, we've got a nice big flat still, okay, nice and marbled, all trimmed up, ready to be seasoned. That can go onto a smoker or injected if you wanted to do that. I've got my point here, so I can cook burnt ends and really maximize the number of burnt ends that I get from the point. And then I've got my pile here of really good quality meat, which I'm going to cube up. Okay, I'm going to cube this up. We'll then grind this down at a later date to then make for burgers, make for meatloaf, make for anything that you want, like a really high fat mince for. I find burgers just a bit of this meat, this brisket here, just seasoned very quite heavily with salt and pepper just before you put it onto the flat top, makes a fantastic product. So I'm just going to cut through this. We're going to have a look at it all, and okay, so there you have it. That's how the few different trims of how we like to trim briskets. One of the things that we actually did, so after packing everything away and cleaning down, we actually decided to to weigh the different components. So, you know, I mean, I'll post that all in the description so you can have a look through that, and I'll also share some of the photos of it on the scale so you can see, you know, exactly how much we have left as a flat, how much we have left as a point, what we now have as burger trim, and then, you know, yes, how much of that fat was actually waste. You know, I've always been a big fan of cooking a bigger, or buying a bigger piece of brisket. You know, even though it might just be for the two of us, I do tend to think that the bigger animal, you know, has a higher probability of being more marbled. That's just that's nothing based on science. That's just a gut feel, as it were. But you know, just because you got a bigger brisket, you know, there's no reason why you can't use it and get multiple cooks out of it. You know, even when we cook the flat on its own, you know, we'll use lots of different recipes to do, you know, how we can use leftovers, whether that be things like quesadillas, whether it be fajitas or beef and black bean sauce, or even making a ragu for spaghetti bolognese. It's you know, it's really versatile once you've got that brisket cooked, and you know, add that smoky element into it. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you liked it, you know, please give us a thumbs up, and yeah, we'll see you soon.